Okay, so now the other thing I want to do is I want to clarify some stuff when it comes to saws, and hopefully you can see it. And what I'm going to do is switch cameras when I do this, but I want to, we talked about hand saws, and as we talked about hand saws, we talked about that there's two different types. There is a called a rip saw and a crosscut saw. So I'm going to change cameras really quick because I want you guys to be able to see what I'm showing you up close. Okay, so you can see this piece of wood right now, and if you look at this piece of wood, you see that it has grain going this way, right? Okay, to cut with the grain is called a rip cut because you're actually just tearing this board in half with a saw. To cut across the grain where this pencil line is called a cross cut. So when you're doing a cross cut, you're actually going against the grain. Therefore, you need to take off less material at a time. And when you're doing a cut that's with the grain, which is a rip cut, you can take off more material at a time because it's easier to cut. So I wanted to clarify both of those types of saws. And if you can see this saw, you see that the teeth are pretty wide and far apart from each other. Sorry, this is a rip saw. That goes with the grain because you need less teeth to go with the grain, okay? This is your crosscut saw, okay? What this saw does is it takes off more material because the teeth are closer together with faster, okay? More material faster. And this is the type of saw you would use for crosscut, all right? So I wanted to clarify that one aspect. And this piece of wood here, which I'm going to cut on camera so you guys can see it, and I have a line drawn here. I'm not going to cut that line because that's part of it. So I'm going to grab another piece of wood, which is a scrap piece of wood, okay? And I'm going to draw a line with a square that I have sitting right here. Okay, remember that this is a tri-square and it's used for marking. And for lack of a better way to do it, I'm going to measure this at 3 inches and I'll put a mark. Now, when I mark these boards, you see how it only has one line, right? There. Okay, normally what I do is I do this. I put an arrow that looks like that. You guys see that? Okay, that's how I mark when I'm measuring so that I don't lose it. If it was just a line, then I could possibly walk away from my project and not find that mark right away, so I'm wasting time. So what this does, it allows me to mark my board in a way that I can see it without no problem. And a lot of times when I was on the job site, what I would do is I would even put a circle around it, okay, with a pencil. Okay, that even gives me the ability to see it better. Okay, so I'm going to put this down on the thing here and try to adjust this camera so we're a little closer. And then when I have my mark, I'm going to put my square on it, just like that, go to my mark, and then I can mark it. Now you can just put your pencil there, right at the point, and then move your square to it. And that way you're ensuring that your mark is going to be right where it needs to be. Okay, then I can mark the board. All right, so now I have my line. Now what I told you was anytime you're cutting in class, you're going to use a clamp. And you should be able to see this down on the table now. So I'm going to do an attempt to use the crosscut saw, the big saw, so that I can get a straighter line. And I am actually going to cut with the crosscut saw and also the back saw, which we had seen when we went over hand tools. So I'm using this clamp to clamp it to the table. I'm going to move this back a little bit. Okay, so you could get a clearer picture of what I'm going to do here. Because I'm going to cut across the grain, I'm going to use this crosscut saw. Okay, the one with more teeth. Now, when I start it, I'm going to put my thumb down on the board. I'm using my thumb, you can't see it because it's behind the camera, but I'm using my thumb as a guide to keep the saw along the line of where I'm cutting, right? Then I'm just going to drag the saw forwards and backwards without any pressure. Just letting the weight of the saw drag on the board. Following my line. I've already moved my thumb out of the way, it's back out of the way because I've got my line started, my saw is starting to cut, and I'm not putting any pressure on the saw. What I'm doing is allowing the weight of the saw to make my cut. And the trick is when you get to the end of your cut, as you can see, I'm already at the end here. I'm going to slow down and take off the pressure so that I don't break my board. Just enough for it to fall off. Okay, so as you can tell, I've made my cut. Now here's the reason you need a square. Because with a square, you can check your cut to make sure that it's square, right? Anytime you cut something in class, you want to make sure that you get a nice square cut. Okay? You don't want it to be crooked, you don't want it to be an angle, you want it to be a nice square cut. Then you can also check it this way to make sure that your cut is square, right? Now it's critical because you can start your saw and have your saw in an angle, right? Going this way, and then you have an angled cut. It's not square. So it's really critical that when you're cutting with hand tools that you make square cuts. Got it? Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is just make a curve cut with the coping saw, and so you guys can see it on camera. Okay, and just for the sake of being able to show you, I'm going to go ahead and draw this curved line and try to cut it with this saw. Okay, so remember I said that this saw pulls down. Okay, so that's how you're going to start it. Start it on your line. And it's a little awkward, so I'm going to move this. Can you guys still see it? Yeah. And get that cut. Okay. So you saw the crosscut saw, you see the coping saw, and that's part of the tools you're going to be using. And for some reason I lost you guys. There you guys are. Okay, so there's the cut. Okay, so any number of curved cuts that you want to make, you can make with this saw. Right? It is awkward. You have to get used to using it. So practicing with it is great so that you'll be able to do the kinds of things you want to do. All right. So those are those two saws. Now what I'm going to do is take this board, which I cut earlier, and this is the beginning of my cell phone stand. And as you can tell, my cell phone sits right there, right? The next thing I gotta do is cut the next piece to make the stand. So I'm gonna show you that. And the picture you saw on the cell phone is actually my GoPro. And my GoPro is see if you guys can see this. Let me move this up a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is cut this in a way so that those two pieces will go together. So I'm just going to arbitrarily say that that back piece is going to be just about this long. Hold on a second. So I'm going to put a mark, use my square to mark that, and then I'm going to cut it. So that's going to be my second piece to my cell phone stand. And I'm going to change this to the other side, because sometimes when you clamp these down, the clamp actually gets in the way of what you're trying to cut. So I'm going to tighten it down pretty tight, because the less this thing moves, the better it's going to be, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and use a back saw to make this cut. Now, this is the back saw. You guys can see that, right? Okay, it has this stiffener here to keep the saw from wobbling or going back and forth. All right, so I'm going to make this cut with the back saw. Same thing applies. I'm using my thumb as a guide, right? So my thumb's going to hold it in line while I start my cut. When you get to the end of your cut, again, you want to slow it down, because you don't want your board to break. Okay, you want a nice clean cut. All right. So this piece here is the piece I want. So I'm going to say it's about 3.5. So that'll make it 2 3/4 or 1 3/4 is the mark that I need. Okay. So I'm going to move this. I'm going to cheat a little bit and just mark it, because for the sake of time, I'm going to take off this piece right here. Okay. So that I make that channel, and I'm going to use the coping saw to do that with. Okay, we talked about these saws when we went over hand tools. So I'm going to make sure that the blade is straight. As you can tell, this blade was twisted, and there's a reason for that. So the same thing applies. I'm going to start lightly. I'm getting a little bit off there. Clean that up later. So I'm going to make sure that your blade is straight. Okay, now I got to get this piece out. So what I'm going to do is turn the saw, twist it so that it goes to the opposite corner, and that piece comes out. Now I'm going to turn the blade totally on angle so I can come back now I'm going to go the opposite way to clean it up. Go back the other way one more time, turning the blade so that it'll cut the other way. Now you want to make sure that anytime you're cutting, you're not holding it with your hand, because that could lead to you having problems cutting yourself and so on. So you want to make sure that you always have material clamped down. Okay, so these two should fit, and there is my cell phone stand. This is a little bit higher, so probably want to cut that off. Now you can do a number of things with this. You could actually cut a design in this part. You could burn a design with a burner on this part. I'm going to talk about sandpaper. We use a lot of sandpaper in class. And if you look at this first sheet, right there, it says P80. What that means is the grit is 80, okay? So that's a pretty rough sandpaper. It's very coarse, okay? That's what you would start with when you're trying to sand a project. This one here, as you can tell, it says that it's P50 or 150. So that's a little bit finer. The higher the number on sandpaper, the finer the grit, okay? 150. And then on this one, it actually shows you right there, it says 220. So that's the finest grit that I'm going to show you. You can actually go all the way to a lot finer, to the thousands. I think the finest one we have is 400. So that's pretty fine for real finish work, okay? So you got to make sure that I'm going to switch cameras really quick. Okay, so when you're using sandpaper, you're going to get a piece that is about this square, right? And you don't want to just throw it away after you use it once or twice. So we have a place where we put used sandpaper, right? So you want to sand the edges so that you get no rough spots off of it. You get all the rough edges off of there. Now, if you look at this one, it's really rough and not straight. So I'm going to switch cameras once again so you get the right angle and you actually see what I'm doing. Okay, so one way to get a flat straight edge, I'm trying to get this as a flat straight edge right here. I'm going to move you a little closer, okay, is to put a piece of sandpaper flat on the table, right, and then just sand that until you get this edge smooth, okay? And then you could take the sandpaper and just take the corner off, and then you have a nice corner on it, all right? Okay, let's see, where are we at? Okay, right here is a better angle of the demonstration I was doing for my class, so you'll see the marking and the measurements. And what we're building here is a small cell phone stand, only using hand tools.
Right here I'm using a tri-square to check, first of all, that the cut is square, and then the angle of my cut is also square.